Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Sun Exchange community call. Today we're going to be talking about impact and how your solar cells have impact. And joining us is a lot of people from the Sun Exchange team, our beloved CEO, Abe Cambridge. We've got Samoa, we've got Kath, we've got lots of people if everyone wants to give a wave. Just quickly run a show. We're just going to go through a presentation, and at the end of the call we will go through the questions that have been submitted via email, and we'll also give you guys an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Just be aware that we are only going to be focusing on impact related questions, so please try and keep your questions on that topic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Abe.
Thanks, Barrett, and happy Friday, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I know the time zones change, but it's still Friday. But it is also nearly winter here in Cape Town, and it's getting pretty chilly. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining this call. It's really about time that we really discuss the really important issues. I mean, Sun Exchange is a impact-driven organization. Our mantra is earn with purpose, and we do have a vision. The company vision is for everyone in the world to own enough solar cells to offset their carbon footprint. I mean, just a little bit of background. So, Simone, if you want to just go to the next slide. I mean, I'm actually a climate change scientist by background. It's what got me into solar energy in the first place. And from studying climate change, you really understand how integrated humans are with our planet. Like we are part of the planet, and the actions we take has a direct impact on the planet, and vice versa. If we don't look after the planet, how can the planet look after us? So, I mean, the fact is that solar energy is the fastest way of producing clean electricity that does not make pollution. It produces electricity from space using passive nuclear fusion energy, and it really is a really remarkable technology. Go to the next slide, please, Samoa. Samoa? Maybe the screen is frozen. Okay, cool. So the fact is that, okay, thank you very much. So I mean, let's pretty understand like what your solar cells are doing. Okay, so your solar panels, your solar cells here in South Africa are stopping electricity from being produced that would otherwise be being produced by coal power stations. The electricity mix in South Africa is probably one of the dirtiest fuel mixes on the entire planet. They're burning very dirty coal, like really low grade coal. The high quality coal is sold off to China and India, Australia, leaving the real lowest grade stuff, and that's burnt in power stations here in South Africa that produce some of the worst air pollution on the entire planet. We don't have the slide on this particular deck. I sometimes have it on here, showing actually the view from space of some of the emissions coming from the Mpumalanga region of South Africa. Actually causes thousands of premature deaths a year from burning coal. So I mean, let alone the long-term environmental impacts to the planet from burning coal. There are actually real human health issues being caused from burning coal. Due to the particles in fuel emission in the coal emissions. Coal smoke is filled with microscopic particles, which causes health issues, and that's the electricity that your solar electricity is preventing from being installed, and that's really the key here. Now, the amount of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent in your solar panel in South Africa is about 1.03 kilograms, so just over a kilogram. So let's call it a kilogram to make the maths easy. So for every kilowatt hour of electricity that your solar panel produces here in South Africa, you're preventing 1 kilogram of CO2 from being emitted. Now, to put that into perspective, a solar panel in the UK will, in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, the kilowatt hour in the UK, rather, the kilowatt hour produced from the national grid in the UK will produce about 300 grams of CO2. So that's 300 grams compared to 1 kilogram. So more than triple the embodied CO2 per kilowatt hour in South Africa. But then consider that there's twice as much sunlight in South Africa than there is in the UK, as in the solar panel will produce more than twice as much electricity. So for the same solar panel, you're going to produce, prevent 8 times the carbon emissions from being released into the Earth's atmosphere with a solar panel on the roof here in South Africa than on a roof in the United Kingdom and Germany and Western Europe, or anywhere with a relatively low carbon intensive fuel mix. So even in somewhere like the United States, there's a lot of nuclear energy, huge amounts of wind and solar being built out. Even in China now, the rate of deployment of wind and solar is literally off the charts, and leaving South Africa with a very, very largely coal-powered fuel mix. So if you go to the next slide, please, Samoa. So you can see the emissions by fuel type in South Africa, with coal being in the grey. Almost the entire CO2 emissions of the country is from coal, and this is 2019. I mean, fortunately, however, we are building out solar and wind resources in South Africa. So, you know, this graph will hopefully be improving over time, and it's going to improve over time due to people like us getting together and actually making an impact. And of course, the great thing about this is this is a global platform. So you as an individual sat at your computers in whichever country you're in, you are reducing CO2 emissions directly from using our website. Because if you reduce the carbon dioxide, produce a kilogram of CO2 from South Africa, you've reduced emissions of the entire planet. It's not South Africa's energy CO2 reduction, it's your CO2 reduction. So if you go to the next slide, please. So, I mean, your carbon footprint is very much related to the amount of CO2 in the electricity you're using or consuming. So it's quite easy to find out. In South Africa, it's about 1 kilogram per kilowatt hour. In the UK, it's 300 grams per kilowatt hour. So I highly recommend that you just have a quick Google and actually find out what your carbon footprint is. It's actually quite interesting to find out. And if you go to the next slide, please, Samoa. That actually it varies from nation to nation because it depends very much on where you are and what the energy mix is of your particular nation. Traditionally, it seemed that the most developed countries have the highest per capita CO2 emissions, but that rule isn't actually true because the most advanced societies, those with the highest qualities of living, now actually are going carbon free. So countries like in Scandinavia and Germany, and even the UK now, the actual per capita CO2 emissions are dropping because they are developing. You know, they've transitioned beyond burning fossil fuels and have moved into a sustainable energy future, which not only results in a cleaner environment, but it also is more economically advantageous, because if you're not spending money on burning fossil fuels, it means your money is more available to grow your economy and create better healthcare systems and better educational systems, which are ultimately going to improve the lives of everyone and the next generation. So next slide, please, Samoa. So interesting thing to do, quick exercise, is to actually calculate how much electricity you use. I mean, just these images here just sort of illustrate what a typical morning might be for somebody. So if your household, someone's running a hairdryer in the morning, you're probably going to use about 0.35 kilowatt hours. Using a coffee maker, we'll use about half a kilowatt hour, toaster 0.11, etc. So you can go through your household's energy consumption, and there are many tools online to be able to do this, and to calculate how many kilowatt hours of electricity you use. Now, using the figure of what the CO2 is per kilowatt hour, you can calculate what your carbon footprint is per day. But bear in mind that every country's embodied carbon per kilowatt hour changes. So it's very important if you're trying to establish your carbon footprint that you use data that's relevant to you, and that's how to calculate that. So once you've worked out what your carbon footprint is, how do you offset it? So let's go to the next slide. So if you were to have purchased 72 solar cells to solar power our project at Neisden Elephant Park. Our project at Neisden Elephant Park has been running for a few years now. But if you're in the first 12 months of buying your solar cells, your 72 solar cells at $6 each, you would have produced about 1.2 megawatt hours, or enough energy to charge a smartphone for 250 years. But interesting enough, that 1.2 megawatt hours equates to around 1 year's worth of the electricity, of my morning electricity use. So the data I just showed you, which actually works out to about 3.4 kilowatt hours a day, 3.4 kilowatt hours a day from my morning electricity consumption, that is now been offset by the electricity consumption produced by my solar cells. Of course, if you're in the UK, your carbon dioxide would have been less, and you'd have produced less carbon dioxide from your morning electricity because you're producing less CO2 per kilowatt hour. So these numbers are specific for my case, where in South Africa I've got a higher carbon intensity. But it also means that you need to buy less solar cells to offset your CO2 if you're living abroad. By putting solar cells in South Africa, you're offsetting more CO2. Now that CO2 reduction, that 1.2 megawatt hours of electricity production for my cells at Neisden Elephant Park is about 1.2 tons of carbon dioxide, which is about 32,000 kilometers of air travel. So at least around the world trip, offset by just 72 solar cells. And of course, that has also given me income. So by owning those 72 solar cells, I've also earned around $80 of income, and I've also reduced the energy costs to Neisden Elephant Park, and they're rehabilitating orphaned and estranged elephants and doing fantastic conservation work. So not only have I now offset my energy footprint, my carbon footprint, I've also earned income, and I've saved costs to a very worthwhile organization. So that's what we mean by Sun Exchange being a triple bottom line impact platform. This is about environmental, social, and economic benefit, which is the really true sustainable development. A country, the world can only develop if you really do look after those three things. You can't have economic development whilst ignoring environmental development, and vice versa. You need all three aspects if you're drawing a Venn diagram to achieve true sustainability. So go to the next slide, please, Mo. So globally, the Sun Exchange community, made up of now nearly about 30,000 members, have produced through the Sun Exchange 5.2 gigawatt hours of electricity to date. That's enough electricity to brew 325 million cups of coffee. That's 803 passenger vehicles driven for a whole year, or 449 million phones charged. So it's just sort of more things that are relatable. But I mean, 5.2 gigawatt hours also, that's in terms of global energy production. I mean, a nuclear power station rated around 500 megawatts rather. So that's about 10 hours of a nuclear power station running on full pelt, being produced by Sun Exchange community to date. So it's significant, but of course it really is just the start. And all the solar panels that have already been installed by our members through Sun Exchange are continuing to produce electricity, whilst we also add more solar panels into the mix. So next slide, please, Smoa. Because your solar panels are in South Africa and offsetting huge amounts of CO2, we have already offset enough carbon dioxide emissions. 5,369 tons of CO2 have now been not emitted as a result of your solar panels, which is equivalent of 1,656 tons of waste recycled. It's 560 car trips around the earth driving, and it's the equivalent of growing 89,000 tree seedlings for 10 years. It's basically a pretty decent sized forest of trees. If you want to grow those trees, you'll sequester carbon dioxide, and that's the equivalent of the electricity that's been produced by the platform already. So by working together through this platform that you can use at the click of a button, we really are making a tangible, measurable difference to the Earth's climate and, of course, the economy. So yeah, next slide, please. So that's really just a snapshot of how you can use Sun Exchange to meet and offset your own carbon footprint. We are a community here, and we're here to discuss topics which are of importance to people. But I really just wanted to just give this presentation to show how we do get people ask us, how many solar cells should I buy? And a good target is to buy enough solar cells to start with to offset your carbon footprint, because at least then you know you're carbon neutral and you're making an income. You can then set yourself additional targets, such as I want to meet my whole household bill costs, using water and electricity. I want to cover those monthly costs through income from the Sun Exchange and those some other targets to aspire towards. So that's just a quick snapshot, and open to the questions that have come in. I know we've had some sent in. So Barrett, do you want to have a look in our inbox and see what's coming in?
Thanks, Abe. Thank you for that. So we've got a few questions, quite a few emailed in, not all of them impact related. So we're going to start off with an emailed question from Robin Clay, who's asked, I've made small investments in Bitcoin and I've elected to have my earnings from Sun Exchange paid to me in Bitcoin. I've read many articles on the impact of mining and on climate change, but it really does appear to depend on where the article comes from. Does Sun Exchange team have a view on this?
We do, and I'm really glad that question is asked, because it's really is a matter really close to our hearts. I mean, we are a firm believer in solar energy and decentralized energy, as we are with a decentralized monetary system. The two things go hand in hand, and whereas solar power is a new system to replace a fossil fuel system, a decentralized current system is replacing an existing financial system, which is inherently also integrated with fossil fuels. So don't forget, the existing financial system, the financial sector, is very, very much tied in with the existing fossil fuel sector. And there is an energy use by Bitcoin, absolutely. There 100% is, but that's what it's what makes it a valuable network. And Sun Exchange is very concerned around how our organization impacts the planet. We actively encourage our staff to cycle to work. We avoid flying wherever possible. We only fly if absolutely necessary. Not that we can fly too much these days anyway. But of course, we want to make sure that we are addressing any impact. And the thing is, it's very easy to offset energy consumption from Bitcoin, because you literally just spend your Bitcoin on buying a solar panel, and you have, in the act of spending your Bitcoin on solar panels, you're actually going to offset probably about 6 times. You're going to produce 6 times more electricity by buying your solar cell with a Bitcoin or with Bitcoins than it took to mine that Bitcoin in the first place. There's a huge positive energy balance from converting the value of Bitcoin into a tangible solar cell. We actually did a SunX diary on this. I mean, if you are interested in it, you can go back to our YouTube channel, and we did some infographics showing illustrating what I'm talking about here. But really, if you put Bitcoin to work and convert it to solar panels, then you've offset the energy consumption. You've created a virtuous cycle, in fact. So one thing that Sun Exchange is committing to do is, for every Bitcoin transaction that's now spent on solar cells, Sun Exchange is going to buy enough solar cells to additionally offset that impact. So we're now going to offset our Bitcoin transaction footprint by buying enough solar cells to warrant that. And just point out also that the Bitcoin transactions, once your Bitcoin is in the Sun Exchange ecosystem, once your Sun Exchange dashboard is accumulating your Bitcoin, all those transactions are off-chain. They don't use it doesn't use any electricity to do off-chain transactions. Your hot wallet is recording how many Bitcoin you've accumulating, and if you spend that Bitcoin on buying more solar panels, there is zero environmental impact on that whatsoever. You're literally just riding off the value of the Bitcoin network in order to unlock additional value by buying more solar panels, which just compounds the positive feedback of generating clean energy through utilizing your Bitcoin. And yes, it is hard to find out what the true energy use of Bitcoin is. I mean, I was looking into it. One of the most commonly used methodologies for calculating the energy footprint of Bitcoin is simply just an assumption that 60% of Bitcoin is spent on energy, which basically assumes that that the profitability of Bitcoin remains constant. But of course, we all know that as Bitcoin price goes up, yes, mining gets harder to do, but it's also incredibly much more profitable for miners. They're actually spending less on energy, the more valuable Bitcoin becomes. So it's actually a very, very crude methodology, one that's often cited by proponents against Bitcoin, is to cite these numbers. And actually, when you really look into it, the cheapest form of energy in the world is surplus renewable energy. So hydropower stations, wind farms, even solar power stations with surplus energy, that's the energy that will have to be turned off or throttled or wasted if it's not utilized. And so Bitcoin mines are set up next to hydropower stations and geothermal power stations to basically capture that free energy. In Germany, they have to pay the grid to get rid of surplus wind energy. You move a Bitcoin mine to a wind farm, that you can now basically access completely free electricity and convert that wasted energy into Bitcoin, and that's entirely possible. And also just bear in mind that the technology is always improving. The efficiency of mining hardware and things like layer 2 scaling, like the ability to have networks like Lightning Network on Bitcoin allows you to do millions of times more transactions per Bitcoin transaction. So things may be alarming now when you look at it, but just look at how efficient the first cars were, and you just think in order to build the car network, the guy who built the first car went to work on a horse. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb using candlelight. We've got to use old-fashioned systems to get to the modern system. And if we keep on building what we're building, then we will transition to a completely clean and inert solid state economy.
Lovely, thanks for that, Ab. Right, the next question here is from Nicholas, and he's asked, will Sun Exchange consider in the future to use blockchains such as Cardano in an attempt to reduce its environmental impact? They recently launched a partnership with the government of Ethiopia, and they have developers hub in South Africa.
Well, I mean, obviously there are many alternatives there are many blockchains. I'm not familiar enough with Cardano what the benefits of the network are. I mean, I'm assuming they're a proof of stake network to start with. But really, I mean, the reason why we use Bitcoin is because it's by far the most secure, it's battle tested, it's the most liquid, it's the most utilized. It's entirely possible for once you've received your Bitcoin, you can convert it to any other currency. You convert it to any other cryptocurrency you wish. But because we use Bitcoin specifically as a medium of exchange, as a medium, as a payment rail, that's really all we're using it for. So if we were to switch to Cardano as our payment system, I don't really see any other benefit to us for switching this. Bitcoin is a store of value. It's designed to be an online peer-to-peer payment system, and it's what we're using it for. Cardano, I should imagine, is some kind of smart chain for smart contracts, etc. And that's great. I'm sure there's some fantastic stuff in there, but I don't see how it would benefit what we're doing, especially if we are offsetting the carbon emissions from the Bitcoin network by buying panels in it. And also, of course, the deflationary aspect of Bitcoin means it's continuing in value all the time. Only accelerates the ability for Bitcoin to do work and to build more solar panels. I can tell you for sure that the people that have spent Bitcoin on their solar panels from in the earlier years have definitely exceeded the amount of energy it took to mine that Bitcoin.
Cool, thanks, Ab. The next question comes from Tom, and he's asked, lately I've been wondering if you'd subtract the amount of carbon emissions that was produced while the solar panel was constructed. Can we get the amount of energy needed to build one solar panel and the amount of electricity it will produce in its lifetime? Thanks.
Well, funny enough, in this example in this presentation, I remember I was talking about 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilowatt hour in South Africa. If you guys remember at the start of this presentation, there's actually 1.03 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt in South Africa. But interestingly, the embodied energy, the embodied energy to create a solar panel is about 3 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So don't forget, when you've built a solar panel, it's going to produce kilowatt hours for 25 years. So but you did have an embodied energy to manufacture that solar panel in the first place. But when you look at the potential of energy production from that solar panel compared to the amount of energy it took to create that solar panel, it's about 3 grams a kilowatt hour. So in some respects, yes, in this presentation, I did deduct the embodied energy. So all the numbers I just gave you does take into account the energy it took to create that solar panel. And the manufacturing processes of solar panels is always getting more efficient, finding better materials and better tooling and better machinery to manufacture solar. And there's some more advances in solar cell material technology. There's even a material called perovskite, which is about to become a more mainstream material, which is further going to reduce the embodied energy of a solar panel. So yes, it is entirely possible to calculate, and it is very well understood what the embodied CO2 is in each solar unit. And I mean, I've just seen a pop-up question from David Gamble. Is there an equation? It's actually, there's some studies on it. You can just give it a Google. I can even put the link in here that explains how they've calculated the embodied energy. It's remarkably low. It's very similar to wind and nuclear, because obviously nuclear energy produces a huge amount of energy, but of course you've got to have you've got to run them in very big facilities. So actually, from a CO2 perspective, it's about solar energy is very much on par with wind and nuclear from being a clean energy. But of course, when was the last time you saw a meltdown of a solar power plant and caused multiple hundreds of $1 billion cleanup operations to solve an issue with a solar power plant? Different meeting, that one. Anyway, so that's my response to that.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll move on to questions from the chat because there's been quite a few coming through. So the first one here: wouldn't impact be grown and improved if wind energy was included in your mix? Is wind on the cards?
No, from a Sun Exchange perspective, we're not looking at wind farms. Very simple reason. By the way, guys, I'm putting a link into the chat for an article on the embodied energy of wind and solar compared to other systems. But anyway, just links in the chat there. So wind farms work more efficiently and better the bigger they are. So the bigger your wind turbine blade, the more you're going to capture, more energy you're going to capture. With a solar farm, it's actually just completely it's linear. Like if you have 10 solar panels, each solar panel that make up the 10 solar panels is going to produce as much electricity as a single solar panel on its own. It's with a wind turbine blade, the bigger you make the blade, the more energy each section of blade is going to produce. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, the bigger the better with wind, not necessarily the same with solar. And also, wind is very fussy about where it is located. There's only a few locations where it's optimal to put wind turbines, and which basically means you've got to tap it into the national grid. You can't put a wind turbine on top of a building. And if you're tapping into the national grid, it means you're selling electricity to a utility, and it means the end consumer doesn't necessarily benefit from having that lower energy. And of course, there are some environmental concerns with wind farms. You know, they do cause issues with bats and with birds. And solar panels are completely inert. There's no moving parts, much faster to install, and much lower running costs for a solar farm. So if we're going to be scaling out and rolling out 1, 2, 3, 4 solar projects a month, which is what we're doing, it would be impossible to do that with wind farms. You know, wind farms have years of development cycles, whereas we can go from a supermarket contacting us and have them solar powered within 30 days. You could not do that as a wind farm. And I think finally, it's easy for people to own one solar cell. You know, that's the unit that we're selling. People buy a solar cell, they own that solar cell. We can prove to you how much electricity your solar cell has produced. And you can even opt to receive your solar cell physically if you want to. We can send you your solar cell in the post. A fraction of a wind turbine is not a wind turbine. If you own a piece of aluminium from a turbine mast, that's not going to produce power. Yeah, that's the fraction of a wind turbine. We can't break up a wind turbine into units which are all the same. You know, the actual solar cell product that we're selling via our platform is actually a solar cell. And that's why it'd be very difficult for us to transition into wind.
So there's a question here that's not directly related to impact, but I think it's worth asking. She's asked, could you please describe the difference between a kilowatt hour and a kilowatt, as they often appear when a project goes live?
I can, and thank you for asking that question. It's one that we do get asked. So basically, a kilowatt is an amount of power that something can produce. So 1 kilowatt of solar panels, when it's at what's called standard test conditions, so when it's exposed to sunlight at a particular temperature, it will produce 1 kilowatt of power. And if you run 1 kilowatt of power for 1 hour, you produce 1 kilowatt hour. So really, it's about it's difference between power and energy. So I mean, I could probably exert a force of 100 kilos onto something, but not for very long. It requires energy to exert a force on something. So I, as an individual, may be able to lift 100 kilos. I can't, by the way. I don't go to the gym very often. But if I did go to the gym, I would be able to lift 100 kilos. But I wouldn't be able to hold it there for indefinitely because it requires energy to hold up 100 kilos. So I have a 100. If you imagine 100 kilos equivalent to a kilowatt, I can exert a kilowatt, But the longer I hold that kilowatt there, the more kilowatt hours I'm using. Of course, in the human body, we're talking calories. So calories is the equivalent of kilowatt hours in the human body, which is why we rate the solar panels at a watt rating. So if your solar cell is rated at 4.5 watts and there's 10,000 of them, it's a 45 kilowatt solar power plant. That solar power plant can produce power of 45 kilowatts, but over a year it will produce kilowatt hours. So it's almost like your solar panel is the ability to do work, and the kilowatt hours is the energy it produces. But each of our projects has got different energy economics. So for example, schools don't use much electricity during weekends. So they typically have lower energy consumption per kilowatt of solar cell compared to something like a Spar supermarket, which uses electricity every day. That's why we got to show the two numbers, because you might buy a project in a 400 kilowatt Spar, but it's actually the kilowatt hours which results in the CO2 savings, and of course the kilowatt hours has a price per kilowatt hour. So hopefully that's explained that. Barrett, can you nod if you agree that made sense?
That did make sense. Yes,
Okay,
thanks, Abe. I particularly liked your example of you lifting 100 kilos.
No, you wouldn't catch me doing that, unfortunately.
Okay, so there's not really many sort of impact related questions. I'm just going through here. Okay, David asked about how many solar cells does he need to offset his carbon footprint, but you already spoke.
Well, I mean, let me just speak to it, because it's actually quite easy. The Sun Exchange, there's an earnings estimation tool on our website for each project, which is set to the specifics of that project. So you type in how many kilograms you need to offset, and it then automatically just tells you how many cells you need to buy to offset that. So a good example would be, say you want to take a flight. If I was going to fly from Cape Town to Johannesburg, I would probably need to offset about 100 kilograms of CO2. So I type in 100 kilograms into the website, and then it would tell me how many solar cells I need to buy. Of course, you may just be, next question as well, how do I know what my carbon footprint is? And it's fairly easy to work out. There are many tools online for you to work out your carbon footprint. Now, I don't know if you saw the start of the presentation, David, but the amount of carbon per kilowatt hour in your country, it would be specific to your country. So there's no point going to a US website and finding out how many tons of CO2 per kilowatt hour if you live in Sweden, because there'll be very, very different figures. So find out what your CO2 kilograms are per kilowatt in your country, and then you can work out how many kilowatt hours you use at home. And that's easy to do, because you just look at your electricity bill. Your electricity bill will tell you how many kilowatt hours you have used, or if you're prepaid, how many kilowatt hours you're using, and then you multiply that by the kilograms per kilowatt hour. And that's just in your household electric. Obviously, how you drive to work will also have a carbon footprint. If you fly around the world a year or whatever, that also has a footprint. And of course, even our diet has a footprint. Those who have a more plant-based diet will typically have a lower carbon footprint than those who eat more meat. So it depends how deep you want to go. But if you just want to go purely on electricity carbon footprint, then that's much easier to do, and there are tools available online. But as I said, once you know your carbon footprint, you can enter that into the earnings estimator, and it'll tell you how many solar cells you need to buy and how much money you can earn from them.
Okay, so I'm just sort of looking at some of the questions here. There's one here that's asking about, can we spend some time discussing the success and snags that we've experienced on projects? And on average, how long does it take between buying solar cells and earning your first rental income?
Yeah, I can. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was much faster to install a solar project. I think the fastest we ever did was Spar Warrington, where we did the crowd sale, and then within the month, literally within 28 days of the end of the crowd sale, the project was live and operating. But then, unfortunately, we all probably the elephants in the room, COVID hit. COVID brought huge issues of supply chains of getting solar panels from China and other components around the world to South Africa. So the delays we're now experiencing with our project is entirely down to getting solar panels. Those of you who've been watching, if you're waiting for your project to go live, you have a live status on your dashboard. The majority of the time, it's waiting for solar manufacturers to come to us. also solar panels to come to us. So that's really where the delays are. We are working with our installation companies to get solar panels into the country pre us launching the crowd sales, which means that the time delays have been massively compressed. But really, those are the most significant delays. Is really getting the panels. We would love for solar panels to be being made here in South Africa, but unfortunately, China, or fortunately rather, because they've reduced the cost massively, they've got the economies of scale. So the reason why solar panels are so cheap is because they're being made in such vast volumes over in China. So it's unfortunately the way, like all things, it's a numbers game. And if we did start supplying solar panels from closer to home, even if you could get them, it would mean that the cost has to go up.
Thanks, Abe. The next question here: what is the Sun Exchange install pipeline for the next 1 to 2 years?
We've got a goal of installing 11 megawatts within the next 12 months at least. In the longer term, and bearing in mind we've now got about 4 megawatts installed, so we want to more than double what we've done, but actually just past December actually. So within the next 6 months, we want to basically double what we've got. So we've got some big projects coming up, and from there we're going to scale up even faster. So we're ramping up our activities to get solar projects in the rest of Africa, and the size of the projects we're doing is also increasing. So those of you who've been with Sun Exchange for a long time, I mean, our first project was 15 kilowatts, our second project was 40 kilowatts. I think the third was around 15 kilowatts. The small projects, in hindsight, at the time they seemed pretty big. Now we're doing projects of a megawatt, 500 kilowatts, 400 kilowatts. So even though I can imagine in a couple of years' time, those projects will seem small. We're already speaking with people bringing us multiple megawatt projects, and that the community is now big enough for us to confidently put that on the platform and know that we can actually get multiple megawatts of projects sold via our membership.
Brilliant. There's a question from Miro here asking about the issuing of lease agreements. There's some projects that aren't that have been live for a few months and that we haven't issued them. So I'll quickly speak to that. We are in the process of automating that system and getting cell references onto the lease agreements. There's a little bit of dev work that's required there, and we will be getting we will be reissuing all the lease agreements to reflect the new Bavin Trust. As some of you might know, we used to set up individual special purpose vehicles for each project. Everything is housed in a Bavin Trust now. So there's a little bit of work going on in the background to get that sorted out. Now, I know, Miro, this is a question that you really want answered. So I thought I'd just talk to that quickly. We are certainly working on it, and we're aiming to get that down in the next month or so.
Also, we're also going to work to have it accessible through the dashboard. So you won't need to wait for it to be emailed to you. It will be there on record on your dashboard. Just actually your member statement is now available to download. We haven't had Sunix Diaries recently to let everyone know that, but if you were not aware, on your, where is it on is it on the profile or the wallet section?
Yeah, above your wallet section. If you just click above your available balance, click on the 3 dots there, and then you can download activity statements.
Yeah. So thanks, Barry. I'm also just looking at some of the questions that have come through on the chat here. So one of the questions from Krishna is, could we convince manufacturers to set up in South Africa? I wish we could. There was a company called Jinko who did have a factory in South Africa, but generally solar manufacturers outside of China are basically assembly plants. They're assembling the components, but they're assembling components that were made in China. So it's basically a way of reducing shipping costs by having items like flat packed, and then they get assembled in South Africa. But really, it's again, it's a numbers game. So even though they had that, the facility in South Africa was not big enough to warrant that size of operation. But I do hope that more local manufacturers will get into it. There was also a question from Gunther, which will be, when will you achieve 1 gigawatt, the size of a nuclear power plant? So that's 1 gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts, and we're currently on 4 megawatts. So we're on our way to a gigawatt, but we're what that's 0.4% of a way to a gigawatt, and so but we will get there. So in the next 5 years, we anticipate hitting half a gigawatt. That's our goal. And I should imagine then within another 2 years from that, we'll be at a gigawatt. So I'd say probably by 2026, 2027, we'll have a gigawatt of solar capacity installed.
Let's just have a look here.
We've got a question.
Yeah.
Sorry to go on this one. It says, does Sun Exchange get any credits from government for reducing carbon footprint? Right. So interesting one, because talking about your solar lease, your solar cell lease, Barrett just mentioned it. Your solar cells lease doesn't actually grant the solar cell owner any carbon credits. They go to the Bevind Trust. But what we are looking at, because Sun Exchange doesn't actually claim those carbon credits, but what we are looking at is a way to be able to sell those carbon credits, which then gives the solar cell owner additional income. Carbon credits are a really very bureaucratic global mechanism. And bearing in mind that a carbon credit is basically going to allow a business to produce carbon. If we collect those carbon credits and don't do anything with them and burn them, we are actually reducing carbon footprint. If you sell someone a carbon credit, you have not reduced carbon. You just basically allowed someone to produce carbon. So it's a very political issue. So if anything, we will accumulate carbon credits and we will allow our Sun Exchange community to purchase, get that income or to sell their credit, which means you can opt to increase your income, but you will not reduce your carbon footprint at that point. So this is all just theoretical. Nothing's been set in stone and we've not built this system. I'm just kind of putting it out there just to explain and illustrate that if you were to receive a carbon credit payment, it means you have not reduced your CO2.
Gunther also asked if, do you only work with certain solar module manufacturers, and how do we ensure that the modules are highly efficient?
Well, for a start, all solar panels are about the same. So the global industry is keeping up with itself, and the actual efficiency of a solar panel hasn't really improved in the 12 years I've been in the solar industry. I think a solar panel was about 14% efficient in 2008. And now a solar panel is probably 18% efficient 12 years later, with the fact that a solar panel now costs a 20th of the cost of a solar panel in 2008. So the efficiencies of solar are in the cost of the solar panel, not in the efficiency of the panel itself. And you will see when solar panels get more efficient, in fact, the efficiency of solar panel manufacturing in general is exhibited by the internal rate of return of the project. Really, because if the cost of the solar panel comes down and it's producing more electricity, it means it's going to be more economically viable. So, over time, the IRR of our solar projects has increased purely because of the size of the projects we're doing and also the cost reduction in solar. But all solar panel manufacturers are basically keeping up with each other because the fundamental physics of a solar cell doesn't really change between solar manufacturer to solar manufacturer.
Jeremy's asked about the age of solar cells. Do they have to be completely replaced in 20 years?
No, actually, it's the solar cell is probably the last component that will need to be replaced. Generally, with a solar panel, it's the sealants around the edge of the frame that will probably degrade over time. I mean, they're UV resistant and they're water resistant, but over time it probably will degrade. But I personally have been to a plant in Wales in the United Kingdom and have seen solar panels which are 40 years old and they're still working. There's no moving parts. It's just a completely inert piece of silicon. It's basically shiny sand that gets it when it's exposed to sunlight. It produces power. I mean, it's a passive object. So over time, a solar panel doesn't. You may get some component failures. Like there's a fuse box on the back of the solar panel that may break, and maybe a diode that goes. The actual solar cells themselves, they can get cracked if they get hit by an object. But generally, if they're just sat there doing what they do, they wouldn't need to be replaced. And there's a guaranteed power output of a solar panel for 25 years. We actually set a 20-year lease on our solar projects to make sure that there is actually guaranteed power left in the solar cell at the end of the system, so that if there is a negotiation to sell the solar plant to the solar panel user at the end, that there is still some value in there.
Do you think Bitcoin miners could be integrated with solar panels sometime in the future?
I think so. I think yes. I think that's entirely possible. I mean, anything is possible, and I can just immediately imagine how it could be done. So even today, there are what are called power optimizers being fitted into the back of solar panels, which is basically some solid state electronics, which calculates the exact optimal current and voltage output of a solar panel. So it's literally just a mini inverter on the back of each panel. It wouldn't be a too much stretch of imagination to attach like an Antminer onto the back of a solar panel as well, and for that Antminer to know that if the battery is full, or if the grid doesn't need power, or if the building is maximize its power usage, then it might as well start turning that surplus solar energy into Bitcoin, and then you have this whole stream of panels doing that. But it may be just more efficient to have one Bitcoin mine, one Bitcoin hardware system attached to each solar power plant rather than the back of each solar panel. But it would be possible to do. And in fact, if we just invented something, should we go and do that? That's teamwork. Let's go and build solar panels with integrated Antminers.
That would be amazing. Use all that excess energy to get Bitcoin. Great.
Yeah.
So the questions have kind of dried up a bit here. There's one last one here. If people turn to solar cells, will the higher demand for silicon, or even is that Perskovite? Rocks pose an environmental impact on that end.
I'm just reading this. If people turn to use solar cells, the higher demand for. Well, I guess it depends on the source of the silicon and the perovskite. I mean, like all, they are minerals at the end of the day. And I mean, you could ask exactly the same question for, the lithium in your battery in your phone, or the rare earth metals in your screen and your phone. Those are commodities. It's very, very, very hard to track where those commodities come from. They go into a pot, they get mixed up, and then the suppliers buy from a commodity pool. Really, really hard to determine the environmental impact of those elements. Of course, the solar panel, once it's built, lasts for 25 years. We're not going to replace out a solar panel every year just to get the latest model. That's not what happens. They're designed to be long lasting. Unlike a mobile phone, which is designed to last a year and has to be replaced. So I would always say to the fact that we are replacing fossil fuels, which also requires mining or drilling or fracking, even, like very, very bad environmental consequences as a result of getting that silicon. And then it prevents that over the 25 years. You're not going to keep replacing it. So silicon is not a consumer throwaway object. It's not disposable. And at the end of the lifespan, a solar panel can be refabricated. It can be reconditioned. It can be stripped down. The base components can be recycled. So I think that's for us the main goal, is just to make sure that the end of life use of a solar panel is environmentally conscientious, so that what we do have control of, we're being cognizant of.
Brilliant. Thanks, Abe. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. That is all we've got time for. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us on hello@thesunexchange.com, pop into our Telegram chat, and if there's any other stuff that we haven't got to today, we'll be more than happy to answer it. And thanks, Abe, for that brilliant presentation and answering all those questions.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to speaking to you all very soon. We'll be filming our next Sonex Diaries probably in the next couple of weeks. We got back from Zimbabwe doing site inspection of Nimbe Fresh, so expect a pretty good overview of that project in the next Sonex Diaries.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.